All right, everybody. In today's video, I want to talk to you about the 3 hacks that I use to never go back to being broke again. You're going to want to listen until the very end because these 3 nuggets, I promise, will make a massive difference on your journey to being financially independent. So let's get right into it. The number one most important hack that has helped me not be broke anymore is that you have to come to the realization that you have a money problem. You have to accept and acknowledge the fact that something is broken with your relationship with money, whether that's because you never had anyone to teach you when you were younger, or because you were taught wrong, or whatever the reason is. But just like any other person that's struggling with an issue or situation, and I often compare it to any kind of addiction that you have, something is broken, and the very first step towards recovery is acknowledgement and acceptance. So what happened with me was that I was in denial for the longest time. I was in denial up until my late 20s. So for close to a decade, I had had jobs and I'd been earning money, and I had always struggled. And what finally smacked me on the head and made me realize that something is very broken and I need to fix my situation is during the last housing crash in 2008, 9, 10, when I'm sitting in my bedroom, I'm looking at my bank account. I have literally $8 in my bank account, and I'd already lost my investment property that I only owned for about 7 months, and I was about to lose my primary residence. And I know at the time I was thinking, I can't believe they allowed this to happen. I can't believe that this is something that's happening in America, that it's allowed to happen, because it's very easy to keep blaming something else or somebody else. And the hardest thing is self-reflection, right? And I talk about that a lot on my channel. It is a trait that is becoming more and more rare these days, and I was lacking that myself back in the day. So what happened to me after we ended up losing our primary residence, it was brutal. It was devastating, as I'm sure many of you have heard of people having lost their homes, maybe even someone close to you in your immediate family. But it's probably the most devastating financial experience of my whole life. And to be honest with you, I have been in a situation where, I've declared bankruptcy. And again, that was actually before I even lost my house. So those 2 things combined finally made me realize, hey, there's something very, very wrong, and I need fixing myself. Something needs to change, and I can never allow myself to get in a similar situation again. And yes, a lot of people, say it was a one-time thing. And yes, but we've had plenty of financial crashes in the past, and every time it's something different. So it's very easy to fall in the trap and come up with a bunch of different excuses, especially like the one that says this time is different. But at some point, you have to admit to yourself that you're the actual problem. And that is when I started my journey to healing my financial situation. So what I ended up doing is I spent a lot of sleepless nights. Once I realized that I have a problem, I spent a lot of sleepless nights reading articles, researching, educating myself. And that continued for many, many months and even years. And I could not believe the amount of valuable information that was out there that I was not aware of. And the thing that ended up kind of happening by chance, so to speak, from me spending all this time educating myself, is that I ended up becoming now obsessed with educating myself as much as possible. That essentially became a new quote unquote addiction for me, because it was just so unbelievable for me to now know that this information is out there, and that the more information I consume, the higher the probability that I would never go back to broke. And at the time when I ended up losing my primary home, in addition to the investment property, I was still fairly newlywed. I had only been married for 5 years at the time. And I realized there's only one way to fix my issue to start with. And that brings me to hack number 2, which is you absolutely have to cut everything other than the bare necessities and start living on rice and beans and rice, like Dave Ramsey likes to say. And the funny thing about that is that at the time, I was not familiar with Dave Ramsey. I actually did not find out about him for probably couple more years later, and I had already been utilizing the rice and beans and rice mentality. But once I found out about him and read his book, The Total Money Makeover, then everything started clicking and falling in place even more. And so there's really only two ways, or combination of the two, for people to fix their financial struggles. You either cut as much as you can, or you figure out a way to make more money. Or the third option, of course, is a combination of the two. Now, luckily for me, back in 2012, 13 is about the time when people started talking about side gigs, side hustles, etc. And I started looking into, okay, what can I do additionally for money? I had a job. My job wasn't paying enough. My bills were still exceeding the amount of money that I was making at my job. So I started researching, okay, what can I do for additional money? Because my problem was that even though I was working a full-time job, my job didn't pay me a high enough hourly wage. So I still needed to supplement my full-time job income with something additional. So I started doing Uber, I started doing DoorDash, and that helped me accelerate the cutting of my expenses. So I still had some debt that I needed to pay down or pay off. And by being able to get this extra few $100s a month, I was able to accelerate the decrease in my monthly expenses. So once I started seeing acceleration of my paying down of my debt, then I was able to move on to hack number 3. And hack number 3 is to know. I know that this was a big revelation for me at the time, but you need to live your financial life as if you can only spend half of your before tax income, so half of your gross income. For the longest time, I realized while I was doing my research that I was like most other people. If I made $5,000 a month, for example, I felt like I had $5,000 a month to spend. And at some point I realized, well, wait a minute, there's taxes there. And I know it sounds very simplistic and, no duh, but believe me, I've talked to so many people that this is a big epiphany, like it was to me at the time. And I realized I have to force myself to pretend that if I'm making $5,000 a month before taxes, that my bills, my expenses should be at half of that. And that is a very aggressive way to look at your bills and your spending, but it's necessary. And whereas hack number 2 was offense, meaning you were aggressively doing something to cut down your debt to zero, so you only have bare minimum living expenses to pay for. Now, once that's done, the half of your gross rule allows you to pay your monthly expenses, but also start playing some defense, meaning you start to protect the money in your savings. So now, ideally, your savings should start to grow, and by only using half of your gross monthly income for living expenses, now we have money to potentially start looking at investments, whether that's, some kind of stock market investment or crypto or whatever else you have. It is very important that your savings or investments start to grow and you protect them at all costs. Because if your expenses start going up again, well, of course, that's going to start taking away from your future. And the other thing that I also started doing is that I started thinking when I buy something, I started thinking in terms of two separate things. For example, the first thing that I was thinking is, if I buy this, whatever it is, this widget, and it costs me $200, whether it's a thing or it's an experience, you have to start thinking in terms of how many hours of a W-2 job will this cost me. So if I'm making, for example, $30 an hour and the thing costs $200, then that's more than 6 hours of me working a W-2 job. And you have to ask yourself, how much do I like my job or how much do I hate my job, right? Because to some people, 6 hours is essentially 3/4 of a normal workday. So if you really love your job, then yeah, I guess it's not as big of a deal. But for me, I've always had jobs that it was only a means to an end for me. I never had a job that I really loved where I couldn't wait to get up every morning and go to my work. And that's the case with 90% of the people that I coach anyway. So do you really want to buy this thing if it means you have to work for 6 hours to get it? So that's number one within the third hack. Number two is you also have to start understanding how money grows, and of course the eighth wonder of the world, which is the compounding effect, compounding interest. So if you were to spend $200 on something today, how much money are you stealing from yourself in the future from your retirement account? So in other words, do I buy the thing for $200 today, or had I actually invested it at an average return? You can use 8%, 10%, 12%, whatever you feel. And if 30, 40, 50, however many years in the future you plan on starting to take your money out, what is this $200 actually worth 30, 40, 50 years in the future? And honestly, I haven't done the math myself, but it's a good exercise for everyone to do by going online and finding an investment calculator or something. Put in the $200 invested today, put in, for example, 10% interest and put 30 or 40 years. And then that, I promise you, is going to make you slam on the brakes. Whether it's $8,000 or $10,000, this $200 will grow tremendously. So that is how I want you to start thinking about money that you spend today. Because money you spend today, the opportunity cost is, what is this money going to be worth for me in my retirement account 30, 40, 50 years in the future? So these are the three hacks that I've used to keep my expenses very, very manageable. I don't advocate to live like a miser and pinch pennies for an extended period of time, but I do advocate doing it for a very, very short period of time. You know, sometimes 6, even 12 months, depending on your situation. But the point is, you need to get extremely aggressive, and then you need to start adopting the mindset of, if I were to buy this thing today, how many hours of my job is this costing me? Or how much will this amount grow to in the future in my investment account, right? So again, to summarize, number one, you have to admit that you have a problem. You have to take accountability for the fact that something is broken with you in your relationship with money. And number two, you have to become obsessive about cutting your expenses as low as possible, and ideally also being able to start a side hustle that allows you to accelerate the pay down of debt so that then you only have your bare minimum living expenses. And number three, when you're about to take a $100 bill out of your wallet, so to speak, to buy something, think about how many hours of W-2 time does this cost me at a job that I possibly hate or dislike very much, right? And also, if I were to put this $100 in the stock market, for example, today, how much is this thing going to be worth in the future in my retirement account? I hope you found this helpful. If that's the case, please make sure that you subscribe, like, share, and also check out my Skool community, where it's not just me talking about this stuff, but also we have a bunch of other people who are in the process of becoming financially free, and they're also sharing a lot of money wisdom. Till next time.